Since a subscriber asked me about AR-15s versus AK-47s for bear defense, I made this video as a response to his question. I do realize that I will probably get criticized for even answering this question. I've noticed that there is a tendency for some people to have a narrow-minded view about bear defense, and when they see a person talking about using an AK or an AR-15, they will immediately dismiss this as pure foolishness. Those who disagree with the conventional wisdom tend to get ridiculed, and those who agree with it tend to get a metaphorical pat on the back. This helps perpetuate beliefs that would otherwise be dismissed if people had actually took the time to look at the evidence. The thumbnail of this video was two different coastal brown bears shot and killed with Full Metal Jacket 223, by the way. These next points are just general knowledge, and aren't directly about either weapon or caliber. So the first point that I want to make is the fact that rapidly fragmenting match bullets can actually easily go through the bottom of the scapula on large animals like moose and elk. When you are misled to believe that it takes a specific kind of bullet, say a solid copper round, to make it through a shoulder, that belief could be a hindrance to you if the round doesn't expand much before it reaches the vitals, and as a result, it doesn't kill as quickly. I think the main distinction between bear defense and bear hunting is what we want the projectile to do. Ideally, if you are hunting brown or grizzly bears, you want to have a broadside shot that breaks both shoulders to incapacitate the bear. A bullet that fragments totally and gives very shallow penetration is obviously not the best choice for this job, but we also don't want to sacrifice too much expansion either. You also may have to consider the fact that you may make an error at some point and only wound the bear, in which case you would be best served with a bullet that can travel lengthwise and reach the vitals if the bear is running away. There is really no good reason to have full body length penetration on a bear for hunting or for defense. Penetrating 2/3 of the body at most is all that is necessary from a rifle round if the goal is hunting. That puts the bullet more or less at the end of the vitals when shot from head on, and when shot from the rear, the bullet will still reach the vitals and damage them. In both situations, more of the energy results in damage to the vitals than a round that blows straight through the bear and buries itself in the ground on the other side. For bear defense, the bear will be more or less facing you, and ideally you'd want to either make a brain shot or put a shot on each shoulder to break the shoulders that way. To hit a bear's brain, you want to shoot straight through its nose. Many diagrams or pictures show the aiming point being higher near the eyes, and this is totally wrong, unfortunately. Not everything happens perfectly though, and you may only have enough time to aim center mass on the bear, which generally speaking doesn't offer immediate incapacitation, like the other methods are more or less guaranteed to do. The degree of penetration needed for bear defense is obviously different because you do not have to shoot a bear lengthwise, as it is facing away from you. I used to believe the conventional wisdom about how you need to have a bonded soft point or a monolithic expanding bullet in order to punch through a bear's shoulder, but I simply can't believe that's true anymore. If you look closely at this picture, you can tell that most of this brown bear's shoulder blade is actually very thin. I've also personally tested rounds on a much thicker piece of solid bone from a cow, and both a .38 Special plain lead round nose and a .38 Special hollow point went through it and still had some energy left to penetrate some distance in water. Now, I'll go over some relevant historical and mechanical things relating to each rifle, and then I'll dive into a caliber comparison. First of all, the safety on the AR-15 is made so that you can easily use your firing hand to flip off the safety. This is very fast to accomplish. In comparison, most AK safeties would require you to take your hand off the weapon to disengage the safety. This is a large disadvantage when you already have little reaction time and seconds count. Choosing to leave the safety off all the time is technically an option, but not really a good one. It is much better to get an enhanced safety that allows you to easily flip it on and off with your firing hand. With this part in place, both rifles are roughly on equal ground. Without it, the AR-15 is by default better than the AK in this regard. A lot of people may still believe that AR-15s and M16s have some degree of unreliability due to their direct impingement system. This is not the case. The M16 gained a reputation of unreliability in Vietnam due to a lack of chrome-lined chambers. The inventor of the AR-15, Eugene Stoner, did not feel that chrome-lined barrels were a necessity. Perhaps more importantly, the company that was making the AR-15s, Armalite, did not have the capability to chrome-plate their barrels. The Army wanted all rifles to have chrome-plated barrels and chambers because they lasted longer and had fewer extraction problems. They actually didn't think the AR-15 was going to be used for any significant amount of time, and viewed it as a stopgap solution because they needed a lot of rifles in order to fight the Vietnam War. Since the chambers were not chrome-plated, they would rust and cause major extraction problems. This was exacerbated by the average soldier's lack of proper cleaning tools. If you have a rusty chamber, a chamber brush can help a great deal. However, flash forward to the present and people have demonstrated that an AR-15 style rifle can be quite reliable and shoot tens of thousands of rounds without needing to be cleaned. The rifle tested in this way by SWAT magazine was called Filthy 14, and they specifically said they never used a chamber brush on that rifle. If you don't have a rusty chamber, you really don't need to use a chamber brush. Another thing that can affect reliability is what many people incorrectly refer to as tolerances. Tolerances are how closely something is machined to its intended shape. What people are actually talking about is clearances, or the amount of space between the parts. High clearances, and consequently a loose fit between parts, is an advantage to a country that mass produces as many rifles as they can. Mass production wins wars, and if you want to mass produce as many weapons as you can, you are choosing quantity over quality. To illustrate this point, I have an AK that has a spot where there is some friction on the bolt, meaning if you try carefully, you can leave the bolt open partially. It is imperfect machining that has caused this, and if there was a tighter fit between parts, it would likely be a significant problem. Weapons that have very high clearance and large spaces between the parts can let more dirt, debris, and mud into the weapon if you are in less than ideal conditions. This is why the AKs didn't do as well as the AR-15s did in the in-range mud tests that Ian McCollum and Carl Carsata did. For the average individual, I see no real advantage in having a weapon that has large clearances, aka more room between the parts. As I've mentioned in another video, some people have had problems with imperfectly machined rifles becoming unreliable in cold weather due to unreasonably small amounts of space between the parts. This is the exception, not the rule though, as most rifles are not built like this. AKs tend to do overall better than AR-15s in cold and icy conditions though. AKs are more likely to be overgassed, which helps to cycle reliably in adverse conditions. AR-15s can have the safeties, mag release, and other things freeze up when iced. AKs really have none of those problems. The safety on an AK, for example, allows you to have a lot of leverage over ice because it's so large. Cold weather use isn't a huge deal for bear defense because bears are supposed to be hibernating then. I say supposed to be because some of them may still be looking for food because they don't have enough fat for the winter. That means a very hungry bear may happen to see you as prey when it's out looking for food. But if we're being honest, moose and wolves are far more likely to be a threat to you in the winter when compared to bears. Modern AR-15s are generally more suited to optics use than AKs, which is not extremely important at very close range. Still, red dots are faster than iron sights, which is good when you have very little time to react to a threat. Now, I'm going to talk about 5.56 versus 7.62 x 39, and I know a lot of people will have the default answer that 7.62 is obviously better due to its greater energy, bullet diameter, and bullet weight. Yes, it has the capacity to do greater damage than 5.56, but whether it actually achieves that depends a great deal on the bullet design. The gel blocks on the left were shot with 7.62 x 39, and the ones on the right were shot with 5.56 or 223. For the 7.62, the 154 grain tool ammo soft point and the Winchester 123 grain extreme point are both good options in my opinion. For the 223, the Hornady 53 grain Tap Patrol and the Black Hills 77 grain TMK are also good options. I would be very hesitant to use any Full Metal Jacket rounds on a bear because they are not as consistent at doing damage than an expanding round. Likewise, if you have an expanding or fragmenting round that only has 7 inches of penetration, like a round intended for varmint use, that would be a really bad choice. I tested a couple kinds of 7.62x39 in water jugs for this video. I would have tested some 5.56 as well, but I ran out of water jugs. I had wolf and tool ammo hollow points. The wolf round penetrated into the 5th jug due to the fact that it did not expand, but rather tumbled like a full metal jacket. It went in a surprisingly straight line, by the way. The tool ammo hollow point, on the other hand, expanded to the point that it fragmented. It really didn't have that much penetration, so it's obviously not a good choice for bears in my opinion. It would do plenty of damage on whatever it hits though if you want to use it for something else. Personally, I wouldn't use either of these hollow points for defense against big bears. After I tested these 2 bullets, I thought that the wolf hollow point would have more expansion if it had a bigger hollow point, and I was right to a degree. I shot this time into a trash bag filled with water, and I could find only small fragments of the bullet afterwards. I think it totally fragmented apart. I was roughly as close as I was when shooting the other rounds, but this time I was really drenched with water. The barrel lid that I had set the trash bag on was broken, and so was part of the pallet that was underneath it all. I think that's quite impressive, even though the fragmentation makes me think that the penetration would not be good enough. As a side note, Tools and Targets tested what I believed was the same kind of wolf hollow points that I had, but he shot them into clear synthetic gelatin and he got expansion from them. I've mentioned before that synthetic gelatin can give us results that are not particularly useful because it's synthetic, and this explains the difference in outcome. You may object and say that it's wrong to dismiss ballistics gel results in favor of the results that came from shooting into water. However, there was an interview with a couple of guys from Barnes, and it was stated that there is a really good correlation between the rounds shot into water, the rounds shot into actual animals, and the rounds shot into organic ballistics gel. So water is proven to correlate to actual results on game, but synthetic gelatin just doesn't always do that. To further demonstrate the point that clear gel isn't so useful, we can take the same 125 grain Barnaul 7.62x39 soft point bullet and note that it gives expansion in water and in organic gelatin, but not in clear gelatin. These Barnauls seem to be pretty good as well, but you should remember that I wouldn't be able to say with absolute certainty what would be the absolute best round for bear defense would be for 7.62 or 5.56. What I will say is that I think jacketed soft points are better than hollow points in 7.62x39. The one question I've had for a while is what amount of penetration in ballistics gel equates to what amount of penetration in bear. I haven't been able to answer this completely to my satisfaction though. However, I have been able to find out that a specific Hornady shotgun sabot exited on a quartering away shot on a female grizzly, and that same kind of sabot only penetrated into the 3rd 1-gallon water jug in a YouTube video. That grizzly obviously gave that sabot less resistance with that shot angle than the 3 water jugs did. So until I can find a better correlation between bear and test media, I would say that penetration into 3 water jugs is acceptable for a defensive round to be used on grizzlies and black bears. So a Wolf 154 grain 7.62x39 soft point would obviously meet this criteria and then some when it penetrates through 3 1-gallon water jugs and a half-gallon water jug as well. Coastal brown bears, on the other hand, can be larger and fatter than the interior grizzlies. On the high end, 8 inches of fat and 3 inches of muscle can be encountered before the projectile gets a chance to hit the vitals. I can't correlate this to ballistics gel or water jugs though, unfortunately. We should also keep in mind that coastal brown bears are less likely to be aggressive than grizzlies due to the fact that they are more well fed, so they don't have to defend their food resources as fiercely as a consequence of the more plentiful food. The high end of anything is the exception, of course, so I want to also include more of an average depth to vitals for the different kinds of bears. I'm not saying that these measurements correlate directly to inches in ballistics gel either. The numbers in the blue section are my own educated guess for the high end depth to vitals for the larger bears. I can't emphasize this enough, but this number is variable as the amount of fat and muscle is not consistent or evenly distributed across the bear. Huge fat bears are, of course, generally exceptional, but they can be more or less common where food sources are very abundant. This could be due to the bears having years of access to a dump where they eat food from the trash, which sets up a situation for conflict between humans and large bears. So if there are only grizzlies in your area, and you have a bullet that can penetrate more than 10 inches of grizzly and still do significant damage after that depth, I would feel entirely comfortable using that weapon for bear defense. I do not think that penetration should be prioritized to the detriment of all else, regardless if it is a handgun or rifle round that we are talking about.